The greatest hunter, the Ojibwe, accidentally shot his own shadow and discovered that every life he took was stealing a piece of his soul. In the vast forests of the northern woodlands, where the Ojibwe people lived in harmony with the ancient rhythms of the wilderness, there was no hunter more skilled or more feared than Makoons, whose name meant little bear. But there was nothing small about his reputation. By the age of 25, he had tracked and killed every type of game animal that roamed the northern forests, and his prowess with bow and spear was legendary among all the woodland tribes. Makoons had been born with what the elders called the hunter's gift, an almost supernatural ability to track prey, to predict their movements, and to strike with deadly accuracy even under the most difficult conditions. He could follow a deer's trail across solid rock, find game in the depths of winter when other hunters returned empty-handed, and shoot an arrow through falling snow to strike a running rabbit at 50 paces. But what made Makoons truly exceptional was not just his skill, but his attitude toward hunting. While other hunters killed only what they needed to feed their families and provide for their communities, Makoons hunted for the pure joy of the hunt itself. To him, every animal was a challenge to be conquered. Every successful kill was a victory that proved his superiority over the natural world. "Why do you hunt so much?" his younger brother, Wabigoon, asked him one day as Makoons returned from yet another unnecessary hunting expedition with a deer slung across his shoulders. "Our family has more meat than we can eat, and winter is still months away." Makoons laughed, his white teeth flashing in his weathered face. "Brother, you don't understand. Hunting isn't just about getting food. It's about proving that humans are the masters of this forest. Every animal I kill demonstrates our dominance over the wild. But the elders teach that we should only take what we need," Wabigoon protested. "They say that every animal has a spirit, and that we should honor their sacrifice." "The elders are old and cautious," Makoons replied dismissively. "They've forgotten what it means to be a true warrior of the forest. I honor the animals by being a worthy opponent. The fact that I always win is just proof of my skill." This conversation took place in the presence of Nokomis, their grandmother, a woman whose knowledge of the old ways was respected throughout the Ojibwe territory. She said nothing at the time, but her ancient eyes followed Makoons with an expression of growing concern. That night, as the family sat around their fire, Nokomi spoke to her grandsons about the ancient laws that govern the relationship between hunters and their prey. "Long ago," she said, her voice carrying the weight of countless generations, "the spirits of the animals made a pact with the spirits of humans. They agreed to give their lives to sustain us, but only under certain conditions." "What conditions?" Wabigoon asked, genuinely interested in the old stories. "First, that we take only what we need to survive," Nokomis explained. "Second, that we honor the spirit of every animal we kill with proper ceremonies and gratitude. And third, that we remember always that we are part of the web of life, not separate from it." She paused, her eyes finding Makoons in the firelight. "The spirits also decreed that any hunter who kills for pleasure rather than necessity, who takes more than he needs, or who forgets to honor the spirits of his prey, will face a terrible consequence." "What consequence?" Makoons asked, his tone suggesting he considered the whole story nothing more than superstition. "The hunter will begin to lose pieces of his own spirit with every unnecessary kill," Nokomi said solemnly. "Slowly, gradually, he will become less human and more like a hollow shadow of himself. And if he continues on this path, he will eventually become a Wendigo, a creature of endless hunger that can never be satisfied." Makoons laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet forest night. "Grandmother, those are just stories to frighten children. I've been hunting for 15 years, and I've never felt more alive or more powerful." But even as he spoke these confident words, Makoons felt a strange chill run down his spine, as if something cold and dark had briefly touched his soul. Nokomi said nothing more, but that night she performed a ritual that had not been necessary in her lifetime. She cast bones and red signs in the fire, seeking guidance from the spirits about the fate of her grandson. What she saw in the flames made her weep for the first time in decades. The hunting season that followed was the most successful of Makoons' career. Day after day, he brought home game: deer, elk, moose, bears, wolves, and countless smaller animals. His skill seemed to have reached superhuman levels. He could track prey that left no visible trail, He could shoot accurately in complete darkness, and he could find game where no other hunter could detect so much as a track. But as his hunting prowess increased, those around him began to notice changes in Makoons himself. He grew thinner despite eating well. His eyes took on a strange, hollow quality, and his laughter became increasingly harsh and unnatural. More disturbing still, Makoons began to hunt animals that the Ojibwe considered sacred or forbidden. He killed white deer that were believed to be spirit messengers. He tracked down and slaughtered wolves during their mating season, when they should have been left in peace. Most shocking of all, he began to hunt purely for trophies, taking only the most prized part of animals and leaving the rest to rot in the forest. Makoons, Wabagwan said one evening, his voice heavy with concern, "People are beginning to talk. They say you've been taking animals that should be left alone, killing more than any 10 families could use." "Let them talk," Makoons replied, but his voice had a strange, echoing quality that hadn't been there before. "Jealousy makes people say foolish things." "It's not jealousy, brother," Wabagwan insisted. "It's fear. The medicine man says that you're disrupting the balance of the forest. He's talking about asking the tribal council to ban you from hunting until you can learn proper respect for the spirits." For a moment, something like the old Makoons flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps even hurt. But then the expression was replaced by a cold anger that made Wabagwan step back in alarm. "No one can ban me from hunting," Makoon said, his voice carrying an undertone that seemed to come from somewhere deep and dark. "I am the greatest hunter the Ojibwe have ever known. The forest is mine to command." That night, Makoons had the first of the dreams that would torment him for the rest of his life. In the dream, he stood in a vast forest glade surrounded by all the animals he had ever killed. But these were not the still, lifeless forms he remembered from his hunts. These animals were very much alive, and their eyes burned with an intelligence and accusation that made his soul writhe with guilt. "Why?" asked a great stag whose antlers bore scars from Makoons' arrows. "Why did you kill me when your family already had meat enough for the winter?" "Because I could," Dream Makoons replied. But even in the dream, the answer sounded hollow and inadequate. "Why?" asked a she-wolf whose pups had starved after Makoons killed her during their birthing season. "Why did you rob my children of their mother?" "Because you were a challenge," Dream Makoons answered. But this time his voice shook with uncertainty. One by one, hundreds of animals stepped forward, confronting him with the same question. "Why?" And with each question, Makoons felt something inside him growing smaller and darker, as if his soul was being consumed from within. He woke from the dream gasping and covered in cold sweat. But by morning, he had convinced himself it was nothing more than indigestion from eating too much rich meat. The breaking point came on a day when the autumn colors were at their peak, painting the forest in shades of gold and crimson that took the breath away. Makoons was tracking a magnificent buck through a grove of ancient maples when he noticed something odd about his own shadow. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the dappled sunlight filtering through the colored leaves. But as he moved from shadow to sunlight and back again, he realized that something was genuinely wrong with his shadow. It seemed diminished somehow, thinner than it should be, less substantial, as if parts of it were missing. Puzzled and somewhat disturbed, Makoon stopped hunting for the day and made his way to a clear stream where he could get a better look at his reflection. What he saw there made his blood turn to ice. His reflection in the water was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not obviously monstrous, but subtly, terrifyingly wrong. His features were the same, but there was something hollow about his eyes, something insubstantial about his form, as if he was slowly becoming less real. As he stared in horror at his reflection, he heard a rustling in the bushes behind him. Instinctively, his hunter's reflexes took over. He spun around, knocked an arrow, and fired in one smooth motion at the source of sound. The arrow flew true, striking its target with a solid thunk. But when Makoons went to examine his kill, he found something that defied all logic and reason. He had shot his own shadow. The shadow lay pinned to a tree trunk by his arrow, writhing weakly like a living thing. As he watched in fascination and horror, the shadow began to speak. Finally, the shadow said in a voice that was his own but somehow emptied of all warmth and humanity, "Finally, you see what you become." "What are you?" Makoons whispered, though part of him already knew the answer. I am what remains of your soul, the shadow replied. Every time you killed without need, every time you took a life for pleasure rather than survival, you lost a piece of yourself. I am all that's left of the man you used to be. Makoons felt the world spinning around him as the implications of this revelation crashed over him like a freezing wave. The animals you killed, his shadow continued, they didn't just die. Their spirits absorbed parts of your humanity as payment for their unnecessary deaths. With each kill, you became less human and more like a creature of pure hunger. But I felt strong, Makoons protested weakly. I felt more powerful than ever. You felt the power of the Wendigo beginning to awaken within you, the shadow explained. The insatiable hunger, the endless need to consume and destroy. If you continue on this path, you will lose the last fragments of your humanity and become a monster that devours everything it encounters. Makoon sank to his knees beside the tree where his shadow was pinned. How do I stop it? How do I get back what I've lost? The shadow was quiet for a long moment, its form growing fainter as they spoke. There is only one way, it said finally. You must undo the harm you have done. You must get back the lives you took unnecessarily. But not through death, through life. I don't understand, Makoon said desperately. For every animal you killed without need, you must save the life of another, the shadow explained. For every spirit you dishonored, you must honor another. For every act of unnecessary destruction, you must perform an act of creation or preservation. But how can I save lives? I'm a hunter. Taking life is all I know. Then you must learn new ways, the shadow said, its voice growing fainter as its form became more translucent. You must become a protector instead of a predator, a guardian instead of killer, a servant of life instead of an agent of death. As the shadow spoke these final words, it faded away entirely, leaving only Makoons' arrow embedded in the tree trunk. For the first time in his adult life, Makoons wept. He wept for all the lives he had taken unnecessarily, for all the spirits he had dishonored, for all the pain he had caused in his arrogant pursuit of dominance over the natural world. When his tears finally stopped, he pulled his arrow from the tree and made a vow that would change not just his own life, but the lives of countless animals and even other hunters who would learn from his example. Makoons hung up his bow and spear that day and never took another animal's life for the rest of his days. Instead, he dedicated himself to learning the healing arts, studying with medicine people and herbalists to understand how to cure injured animals rather than kill them. He built shelters for creatures during harsh winters, dug water holes during droughts, and fought off predators that threatened young animals during their most vulnerable seasons. When human hunters violated the sacred laws of respectful hunting, Makoons would track them down and confront them, using his legendary skills to prevent unnecessary kills rather than to cause them. Slowly, gradually, Makoons began to feel pieces of his soul returning to him. Each life he saved seemed to restore a small fragment of his humanity. Each act of kindness toward the creatures of the forest brought back a little of the warmth and compassion he had lost. But the process was long and difficult. There were many dark nights when the Wendigo hunger still called to him, when the desire to hunt and kill rose up like a savage tide. During these times, Makoons would remember his shadow's warning and force himself to find constructive ways to channel his energy. Years passed, and Makoons became known throughout the Ojibwe territory not as a great hunter, but as a great healer of animals. Mothers would bring him injured fawn. Trappers would seek his help for accidentally wounded game. And even other tribes would sometimes request his assistance with animals that had been harmed by human carelessness. With each creature he helped, Makoons felt more of his true self returning. His reflection in streams and lakes grew more solid and real. His shadow regained its proper substance and form. Most importantly, the hollow, echoing quality left his voice, replaced by the genuine warmth of someone who had learned to value life above all else. But the full restoration of his soul didn't come until the day he encountered a young hunter who reminded him painfully of his former self. The young man, Mijiji by name, was everything Makoons had once been: skilled, arrogant, and contemptuous of the old ways. He hunted for sport rather than need, killed sacred animals without remorse, and boasted that he was superior to all the spirits of the forest. When Makoons tried to counsel him about the dangers of his path, Mijiji laughed. "Old man, The young hunter said mockingly, "Everyone knows you used to be the greatest hunter among the Ojibwe, but now you've gone soft, spending your time nursing injured rabbits like an old woman. Why should I listen to someone who's forgotten how to be a real warrior?" That night, Makoons had another dream, but this time he was not confronted by the spirits of animals he had killed. Instead, he found himself in that same forest glade, but now it was filled with all the creatures he had saved over the years. The animals looked at him not with accusation, but with gratitude and love. As he watched, they began to glow with a soft, warm light that seemed to flow into him, filling all the empty spaces in his soul that had been carved out by his years of unnecessary killing. "Thank you," said a deer whose broken leg he had splinted and healed. "Because you saved me, my children lived to grow up in the forest." "Thank you," said a bear whose cubs he had protected from an unseasonable flood. "Because of your kindness, my family line continues." One by one, hundreds of animals that he had helped over the years thanked him, and with each expression of gratitude, Makoons felt his soul becoming more complete, more genuinely human than he had ever been even before his hunting days began. When he woke from this dream, Makoons knew that his transformation was complete. He had not just restored his soul, he had made it stronger and more compassionate than it had ever been before. But his work was not finished. There was still Majisi to consider, and the young hunter was heading down the same dark path that Makoons had once traveled. Rather than simply warning Majisi again about the spiritual dangers of his hunting practices, Makoons decided to take a different approach. He began following the young hunter, not to interfere with his hunts, but to care for the animals that Majisi wounded but didn't kill cleanly. Day after day, Makoons would trail behind Majisi's hunting expeditions, finding and healing the animals that had been injured by careless or cruel shooting. He would bandage wounds, provide food and water for weakened creatures, and offer comfort to animals that were dying from injuries too severe to heal. At first, Majisi didn't notice what was happening, but gradually, he began to realize that wounded animals were disappearing from his hunting grounds before he could track them down for finishing kills. Curious despite himself, Majisi began to track the tracker, following Makoons' trail to see what the older man was doing. What he discovered changed his life forever. Hidden in a grove of pine trees, Majisi watched as Makoons carefully cleaned and bandaged the wounded leg of a doe that Majisi had shot earlier that day. The hunter spoke softly to the frightened animal, his voice filled with a gentleness that Majisi had never heard from any man. "I'm sorry, little sister," Makoons whispered as he worked. "I'm sorry that one of my people caused you this pain. But you will heal, and you will run again in the forest, and your children will know the joy of life." As Majisi watched, something impossible happened. The doe, which had been terrified of human touch, relaxed under Makoons' hands. More than that, she seemed to understand his words, her large eyes looking into his with what could only be described as gratitude and trust. It was then that Majisi realized he was witnessing something sacred. Not just the healing of an animal's body, but the healing of the spiritual bond between humans and the natural world that his own actions had been helping to destroy. For the first time in his life, Majisi felt genuine shame for what he had done. But more than shame, he felt a desperate desire to understand how Makoons had achieved this incredible connection with the animals of the forest. That night, Majisi approached Makoons' camp and asked to speak with him. "Teach me," the young hunter said simply. "Teach me how to heal instead of harm." Makoons looked into Majisi's eyes and saw the same hunger for redemption that he had once felt himself. "It won't be easy," Makoons warned. "You'll have to give up everything you think you know about being a hunter. You'll have to learn to see animals not as targets, but as relatives. You'll have to accept that true strength comes from protecting life, not taking it." "I understand," Majisi said. "Or at least, I want to understand. Will you help me?" And so Makoons took on his first student, beginning a tradition that would continue for generations among the Ojibwe people. He taught Majisi not just how to heal injured animals, but how to live in harmony with the natural world, how to take only what was needed, and how to honor the spirits of all living things. Years later, when Makoons finally passed on to the spirit world, he did so as a man whose soul was not only complete, but transformed. He had learned that redemption was possible for even the darkest sins, that love could overcome the most destructive habits, and that the greatest victory a hunter could achieve was learning when not to hunt. Mijezi carried on his teacher's work, and time took on students of his own. The healing tradition spread throughout the Ojibwe nation and beyond, creating a new understanding of what it meant to be a true warrior of the forest. And sometimes, when young hunters were tempted to kill for sport rather than survival, the older ones would tell them the story of Makoons, the man who shot his own shadow and discovered that every life taken unnecessarily was a piece of his soul lost forever. But they would also tell them the second part of the story, how he found his way back from the brink of becoming a monster, how he learned to heal instead of harm, and how his redemption became a beacon of hope for anyone who had lost their way in the darkness of their own destructive impulses. This is the way of the hunter spirit. This is the way of the Ojibwe. And this is how one man's journey from destruction to healing became a legend that guides hunters to remember the sacred responsibility that comes with the power to take life, and an even greater power that comes from choosing to preserve it instead.